Hi folks, this video is going to provide you with a brief introduction to sonnet structure. We'll be focusing today on the English or Shakespearean sonnet and talking a little bit about how that particular sonnet form is constructed and what ideas it addresses. So what's a sonnet? A sonnet is traditionally a 14-line English poem that follows a familiar pattern in terms of ideas and structure. It was originally an Italian poetic form, very often used for elaborate love poetry. And around the time of William Shakespeare, a little bit before, it got adapted into English and modified a little bit. Shakespeare wrote hundreds of sonnets, and they all follow the same predictable pattern. It's a very formal kind of poetry and very tightly controlled poetic form, both in terms of rhyme and meter. So let's look at some examples of this. Traditional English sonnets are 14 lines. They are divided into 3 quatrains. Those are groups of 4 lines and a couplet. So a quatrain here, the first 4 lines, another one, and then a couplet. Shakespearean sonnets follow a predictable rhyme scheme. When we mark out rhyme schemes, we assign a letter to each new sound. So the rhyme scheme AB, AB is alternating between a sound that we're labeling A and a sound that we're labeling B. There's then a change in line 5 where we are introduced to a new sound, which alternates to another new sound, which we're introduced to in line 6. Shakespearean sonnets are all written in iambic pentameter. Iambic pentameter, which is the common meter in English, is a meter in which every other syllable is stressed, and each line is 10 syllables long. All sonnets follow a pattern vaguely of introducing their subject in the opening quatrain, expounding on it in the following 4 lines, reflecting back on it or somehow contradicting it in the next quatrain, and then concluding with a couplet. So let's take a moment to listen to a Shakespearean example. While he's been in quarantine, Sir Patrick Stewart, who you might recognize from Star Trek or X-Men, has been reading a Shakespearean sonnet every day on his Twitter account. So you can click on this video in order to hear him read Shakespeare Sonnet 12. Focus on the sound of the sonnet as you're listening, rather than trying to understand every word. Really listen for how those different sounds create breaks in the language in the sonnet. So I'll pause here and let you click over to his Twitter account and listen to that poem. Welcome back. Now we're going to take a look at a traditionally structured modern sonnet by Edna St. Vincent Millay. We're looking here at the rhyme scheme first. So you'll notice that I put the rhyme scheme down the center of the slide, A, B, A, B. So that's the first 4 lines, right? Take a look at the words in the first 4 lines. Choice and voice make the same sound. That's why they have the same letter. Depend and end likewise make the same sound. You'll also notice by looking at the punctuation that the quatrains are also broken up by as the end of sentences. So take a look at the first sentence of the poem, the first 4 lines. I know my mind and have made my choice. Not from your temper does my doom depend. love me or love me not. You have no voice in this, which is my portion to the end. Those 4 lines are marked off as the end of the sentence. They introduce the subject of the poem. They present a problem that the speaker is facing. The next 4 lines will develop on that. Your presence and your favors, the full part that you could give, you now can take away. What lies between your beauty and my heart, not even you can trouble or betray. So in the opening 4 lines, you'll notice that the poet is introducing the subject, right? We have a speaker who is maybe having a bit of an argument with someone that they are in love with and or have been in love with. And this is them saying that they've made up their mind about something. The next 4 lines develop that idea out. The next 4 lines will further develop that idea. So you'll notice here that there's a change between what the speaker seems to say in the first 8 lines and what she turns to say now. Mistake me not, unto my inmost core I do desire your kiss upon my mouth, that have not craved a cup of water more that bleach upon the deserts of the south. So in contrast to the first 8 lines of the poem, these lines seem to express that actually the speaker, even though she might be mad at this person that she's in love with, still loves them, still desires them, still misses them. So here the speaker presents a rather complicated conclusion. In saying these lines, here might you bless me. What you cannot do is bow me down, who have been loved by you. The speaker in the poem is pretty determined that her mind is not going to be changed, even though she's still in love with the person that she's talking to. So you'll notice here that in this very traditional sonnet, those divisions within the poem help give us clues into what the speaker is talking about. Let's look at another example. This example is less traditional. So you'll notice here that it's not divided evenly into 3 quatrains and a couplet. You'll also notice that the stanzas aren't uniform and that the lines don't cleanly end in punctuation. But the ideas do follow the same general trend. So take a moment, pause the video, take a look at this poem by Robert Hayden called Those Winter Sundays, and ask what subject is being presented in the first 4 lines. How do those ideas get developed? And ultimately, how do they get reflected upon and concluded? I'll pause here and give you a chance to read over the poem. Welcome back. So after having read over the poem, you'll notice that the opening 5 lines of this poem introduce the subject. They present the speaker who is reflecting back on his experiences as a child, and he's thinking back about his father who woke up early on winter Sunday mornings to make a fire and warm the house. In the next stanza, the speaker reflects on that experience, thinking about the images that he remembers and thinking about what it was like growing up in this house. In the next stanza, in the first part, the first sentence of that last stanza, the speaker further reflects back on the ideas that are presented. And the last 2 lines provide a conclusion as a question. What did I know what did I know of love's austere and lonely offices? So here, the speaker is thinking about the way that his father showed his family that he loved them. That by these simple acts of waking up early and warming up the house for everyone else, he found a way to show love for his family. So you'll notice here that even though the stanzas aren't uniform, they don't follow that very traditional pattern. The ideas do kind of follow cleanly from one to the next. So let's look at a contemporary example from the poet X. You'll notice that this poem likewise does not follow the traditional um, stanza structure. It doesn't follow that you have those 4-line stanzas, right? But it does follow the structure of a sonnet in other ways. So I'm going to pause here so that you can read the poem, and we'll come back and look at how this poem bends the rules of sonnets in order to emphasize particular ideas. Welcome back. So this poem is called First Confirmation Class, and it's a selection from Poet X. The speaker, Stiamata, is sitting in her first confirmation class of the year with her best friend, Caridad, and they are sort of sitting in the back of the class. And this sonnet is her reflection on that experience. In looking at this, you may have thought there is no way that this is a sonnet, but in some ways, it follows those same patterns of ideas that we've seen in the other forms. So the opening part of the poem is going to present the subject and develop it out. So you'll notice that the first 6 lines here really are about presenting the subject. And then it gets developed in the next 3 lines here. But leading up to the conclusion, there's kind of a reflection back that happens in this stanza here. And the conclusion of the sonnet in the last 2 lines is actually a kind of contradiction. You'll notice that the last 2 lines, the conclusion, present a kind of contradiction. After spending the first portion of the poem talking about how she doesn't understand why the other kids in confirmation class don't have any sense, the last 2 lines say, "Maybe because I can't keep the billboard frown off my face, the one that announces I'd rather be anywhere but here." Part of the reason why Siamato's classmates might be staring at her is because she's sitting in the back of class with a huge frown on her face. Um, Even though they know each other from around the neighborhood, this sonnet presents a situation where the conclusion is actually a kind of contradiction. So that's 3 different kinds of sonnets. Um, I want you to think at this point about how you know that something is a sonnet. So think about this animation. It's a house, right? At what point do you know it's a house? Probably right now. Like once there are walls and a roof, you know it's a house. Similarly, in English poetry, 14-line poems that seem to follow a predictable pattern of ideas are almost always a type of sonnet. If you're familiar with the structure, you can recognize it even if it looks slightly different. So now let's go back to the Mackay sonnet. It's a good time to ask yourself, how closely does that poem follow the traditional Shakespearean form? Is it adopting the very traditional structure, or has he changed it in some way? What do you notice about the structure? Does it follow those rules closely or not? And finally, and most importantly, How do those structures convey the poet's meaning or message? Take the time to go back now to the Millay sonnet and ask these questions. Additional resources can be found in your classroom.